here, all brought in here for the next, I guess, almost 4 months left in our program here. So this session was spurred by...
They growing 1,000 new users per day globally. I went through a startup Chile a few years ago and also went through Y Combinator, so I have a really big network and connections all over the world, and if you want to be part of them, I would love to share those connections. Sorry.
Awesome, thanks, Leah.
Cool. So I'm Nikki. I'm the founder of Codemakers. So we run after-school coding classes for kids, and all the classes are run online in a virtual classroom. So kids kind of connect in from all over Australia for their class each week with a teacher, and they write code that modifies their Minecraft game. So we basically get paid to blow stuff up in Minecraft with kids, which is pretty fun. Prior to that, I ran 99 Dresses, which was an app that allowed women to trade fashion with each other. I went through Y Combinator as well. And that one failed, but went through like some pivots as well. So I'll probably be talking about that.
And I'm Benjamin Bryant, here from Los Angeles with a company called Conference Ape. We print conference and event badges. Prior to that, I was one of the early team members at Pebble Technology. We made the smartwatch. And then before that, a co-founder at a company called Earbits, which is a music marketing platform, also a YC company.
Just for the record, I didn't go through YC. I said no, actually, to YC, which is an interesting topic. My name's Chris. I have a company called Pinch. We're basically a voice analytics company. So we have a number of products from a SaaS level. We have a basic call recording and annotation product. On top of that, we can then take 10,000 conversations you've had on a help desk and then come back and tell you what are the things that you don't know about your customers. So I previously had a number of different startups, and it's going to be really interesting to hear and share about how people decided to turn things off. I'm part of the HotdesQ program as well, having just relocated back from San Francisco.
Woo, welcome home. Awesome. And just real quick, so my company is Hip Pocket. We're a fintech company out of the United States as well. So we're talking about killing either features, which is, I think, like the low-level sin of killing. Then there's killing an entire product. Then there's killing your actual startup. And so I know some of your backstories a little bit here, and I think we'll have a great conversation here. But I'm going to go ahead and start with Nikki, because I think you've got a very you've done a great job posting on Medium about the challenges with 99 Dresses, and you were just very open and stuff like that. I know you got a huge response from that. So you've killed an entire company. So you want to talk a little bit about that experience just to set the table here?
Yeah, so with 99 Dresses, just as an overview, it started as a website that allowed women to trade fashion with each other using a virtual currency. Started in Australia, it took off here, went to Silicon Valley, went through Y Combinator, raised some money, moved to New York, grew it out there. It wasn't a very smooth ride. There was a lot of ups and downs. And so I'd say like the two kind of really relevant sections of that journey was one when I basically had a product. It was a website. It worked really well in Australia. Went to the US and kind of made the kind of silly assumption that if it worked here, it would work over there, and it didn't. And so it was, and then I had all these visa issues. So I was stuck in Australia, had a product in the US, and it just like, you could just feel it, like the numbers weren't there. It was really kind of getting a hard time getting traction, especially compared to like in Australia, it just clicked, took off, like, and so it was kind of night and day. And it got to the point where I got on a plane and I was just like, I'm just going to America and figuring out like what we're going to do about this, and just talk to a lot of kind of women or potential customers, I guess, in that demographic. And that was like my first big mistake, was because of the disconnect, I think, between me being in Australia and customers being in the US. I noticed that every time my product veered off course, it was because I was neglecting talking to customers, like I felt out of touch with them. So I went and talked to and interviewed like a bunch of women, and it was very, very clear themes about like why it wasn't working in the US. And one of the key things that came out of it was like a lot of people saying, look, love the concept, I'm not going to touch it unless it's a mobile app. And just, it was, Australia was like a few years behind in the whole mobile app trend. And so it, like, everything was not mobile app at the time in Australia, whereas in the US, that's where everything was going. And I just, like, we'd always been a website. And so it was that decision of like, I went back to the drawing board and said, okay, like, here are all the different issues or things that aren't working and why they're not working, which I had the data on that. And I said, I still want to solve this problem. How do we solve it for the US market? And we had to redo our entire model, which meant like redoing a lot of the trading mechanics and everything to make it more about instant gratification, and redid the whole business model, all that kind of stuff. And then we also made the decision, and by we I mean me, to chuck out our website completely, not support it at all, and just go entirely mobile. And I communicated that really poorly with the team. I would say, like, especially when you'd spent so long working with a team on building something, and then you have to communicate, actually, like, we're scrapping all of that. I mean, you still kind of will have some of the code base you can use, but we were essentially going to have to rebuild like a native app at the time. And yeah, so I kind of felt like there was like a bit of a mutiny brewing, and I was like in America and they were in Australia, so I got on the plane, kind of came home, and we all got on the same page about it. And it ended up being such a good decision because like that's what saved the company. Like we redid it all, and that app like took off in America. So that was kind of like a brief overview of that side of things. And then the other thing was the whole business overall failed. And I think, to be honest, I think it failed because a round of funding fell through at the last minute, which was a symptom of a bigger problem, which was, I think, that it was a great product, great community, shitty market to be in as like a business, I think. And I think also, like, I probably could have salvaged it somewhere. Like, if I really had if I really had wanted to, I maybe could have like gone and really hustled and kind of raised another round of funding. But I had an investor I was speaking to, one of my investors, and on the phone with him, and he's like, look, just put aside the fact that I'm an investor. Do you want to spend the next, few years of your life on this? You got to think about the opportunity cost. I was 21 or 22 at the time. And I realized I didn't believe in it anymore. And I think it was because I'd seen it play out. I'd seen the nuance of the market. What had started out as this great idea in my head, and people had used it, but like from a business point of view and the unit economics and the market forces and like all this different stuff that you learn over 4 years, I didn't like believe in it. And so like I think out of stubbornness and kind of I probably would have kept going with it just because I don't see myself as someone who gives up, and that's like the narrative that entrepreneurs like to tell themselves, like, I don't give up. But I was very lucky that I was kind of killed, or like the startup was murdered because we couldn't get the extra round of funding. And so it was like I was forced to give up, which was a very, very good thing for me because I don't think I would have willingly done it. So, it was kind of good to be shot in the head a little bit. And I think it was very good for the company because the opportunity cost of keeping working on that, and it was very high. And then also, sorry, I'm talking for a long time, but also, like when we announced that we were shutting down, our community rallied, and like they were like posting stuff on our app, kind of like, okay, ladies, we've got to save 99 dresses, and then they'd comment and be like, okay, Nikki, I've emailed all the investors I know, and then they're like, oh, Nikki, you've got all our credit cards on file. Why don't you just like charge us a subscription fee? And I'm like, that's so cute, but you don't understand like how much money it costs to run these, like, to pay for developers and all this extra stuff. Like, so it was a heartbreaking thing from the community point of view to have to shut down the community of women who are like obsessed, like the women who love this app. It was a huge part of their life. And so, like that part was heartbreaking, and it was heartbreaking to kind of break up the team and, help them get other jobs and all that kind of stuff. But it was ultimately, I think, the best thing for the business I left it to the point where it's like, if our bank balance dips below this point, like that's enough to wind up the company gracefully and not leave it a mess. Make sure everyone gets out kind of well and it's all like legit. And so we did that. And yeah, so like I think that was for me the best way of going about it, rather than we could have put it on zombie mode where like it could have self-sustained without actively developing it and all that kind of stuff. But like, I just, like the opportunity cost, the bandwidth of doing that, it's just like, I personally don't believe in that. So yeah, anyway, that's my very long overview.
That's awesome. Anybody have any questions for Nikki too? The panel is kind of meant to be somewhat informal, and we'll try and get Q&A at the end as well too. Scott, you want to grab that? Yeah. Yep. Perfect.
How did you break the news to the community that you were winding up 99 Dresses?
I can't remember exactly. I'm pretty sure we emailed everyone, but also posted, like, because it was a social app, so we posted like a listing with the news, and people would comment on it and stuff, and then they'd start listing their own things, which were just, instead of clothes and listing clothes on the app, they'd list like screenshots and messages and stuff that people would comment on to have these conversations. So I actually announced it to the community and then announced it like publicly on my Facebook by writing a blog post that I wrote the day we decided to shut down. And so that was more my whole journey, because to be honest, I was like, oh, the Australian press is going to have a field day with this, because they love to build you up and then rip you down as soon as you put one step wrong, which they'd done like a few times before. So I was like, oh, well, at least I'll write the story, share it with my friends, and they will kind of know like the real thing rather than the like manufactured story that the Australian media wants to spin about it. But that ended up getting shared like all over the world. So then suddenly like everyone knew that we failed. Yeah, so that's kind of how it spread out a lot. Yeah. Cool.
This wasn't one of the prepared questions, but I think when you were talking, and I know my own entrepreneurial journey, how do you separate that, like, you know, like I failed versus the company failed and stuff like that too? How do you, I mean, or is it possible? Because that's a very difficult challenge that a lot of entrepreneurs have. And then we'll go on to Benjamin.
That one's really interesting, because I wrote this blog post about the whole journey, and so many people at the end, like I got thousands of emails from other entrepreneurs who reached out, and they're like all this like, you're not a failure, and like, you know, keep your chin up and stuff, which is lovely, but it was kind of a bit odd to me, because I'm like, I don't think I'm a failure. Like, the business failed, but like I don't think I'm a failure. And so like I didn't really go there per se. I think I felt like a shepherd who had led her sheep off a cliff. And that was heartbreaking, like to me, to have gathered a team and the loyalty, and like having such a loyal team to the very end, and then, you know, for it to not have worked out. So I feel like to an extent you like fail them, but you very quickly kind of have to get over that a little bit, because I think also my confidence was really shook. Like it took me a few years to kind of, I was just explaining to Benjamin, like with Code Makers, I had to really be pushed to start it, because I think I was quite scared, or just like didn't have the confidence of like, oh, can I really do this again? So yeah.
Thank you. Ben, you want to tell us what you killed?
What have I killed? A few things. I will comment on the element of looking back. Like, I feel the experience of doing it or working on projects that fail leads you to kind of have a kind of personal detachment from here. When you start off, you're viscerally attached, but then after you've kind of been through some ups and downs, or many ups and downs, you kind of look back at it and you realize that, like, you know, your personal attachment is the larger pursuit, the larger goal, and most of the times things will fail, and that's just because things are difficult. And so, you know, you learn to accept it and learn from it. So in terms of what have I killed, so we'll take a narrow slice of the past 8 years. So I had an original business. This is what we took through Y Combinator, was a music marketing platform called Earbits. And it was interesting in the sense that the business model for it worked. It was a pay-for-play radio station that bands would pay to have their songs broadcast out to listeners. Those listeners would come back and say, hey, I really like the music you've playing on here. I want to be a fan of your bands. And then the band could sell them concert tickets and music merchandise, which is really the fundamental business of how the music industry works today. You never make money for your actual music. And we actually had a degree of success around there, but it's not exactly what I'll call the zombie business, but it was never really going to take off to a level. Well, I initially had walked away from that onto another project, which I'll get to in a moment, but we ended up actually doing a very similar thing, broadcasting to our community saying we're shutting this down around there, which actually was very amusing because it led to us getting a follow-on investor, which eventually led to an acquisition or so forth on here. But I would write it off from if you're talking in the venture pursuit, like the idea to grow a large, national, international level business, it was a failure. And, I think, in that regards, you leave or you wind it down because at some point in time you realize you're never actually going to kind of reach escape velocity on here. And that's I think, a really difficult perspective early on. Like, it's easy for me to look back and say, yeah, no, we were wrong in that. We should have killed it years ahead of time. And I spent probably 3.5 years on that project from start to finish. Good ideas do not necessarily mean you're going to have good businesses. And if you're going to make an impact in this world, you really need to dream high, and you understand that the startup is really an experiment to find out if there is a business there, and you can reach that bigger goal by iterating and moving on either similar businesses from your learnings or just on to completely new businesses. Now, the second business was a company called Pebble, and it is now the company that has created, I guess, what's now about a $2.7 billion smartwatch industry. However, I guess about a year ago, we ended up selling to Fitbit in probably a less than auspicious terms. We were the darling of Silicon Valley for about 2 years, having gotten our initial sea legs with a $10 million crowdfunding campaign, and kind of really launching in what people thought we were going to be the next Apple, which perhaps we could have, except we got in a situation where Apple came along and decided to enter our market and more or less eat our lunch. And so in that regards, I can say, not that I've actively killed or actively been the part here, but have been in a situation where we've had to take a 180-person company and kind of realize that ultimately this business, despite having, growth in the, large double digits on an annual basis and really going that venture-backed skyrocketing growth there, was actually not going to reach the true escape velocity. Like, it was not going to become a business that can IPO and so forth. And maybe we could have exited earlier, in which I think would be a great return for the investors. Instead, we decided to take it to the absolute bitter end here. We had to be dragged out of the door, kicking and screaming. It was, I guess, what are the reasons around there? Partly fatigue, that you just finally like, all right, enough is enough. You realize the landscape has, in fact, changed. And then also, sometimes, when large amounts of money are at play, there is Machiavellian tactics that actually take over, and there is actually playing and positioning that can kind of force a business into closing that. I guess the only other thing I'd say with inside it, in the latter time at Pebble, I actually adopted the title, which was called Head of Special Projects, where my role was to try out every new harebrained idea that we had came up with and validate whether or not it was good. So it was actually running a lot of little micro mini startups with inside, I guess, an organization that actually had some structure for there, but it led to many situations where you'd go on, you'd find ideas that were really good, and you'd say, you know what, the market's not here, the timing's right here, and you had to kind of curtail it off. One was a project, we called it Pebble Concierge, but the idea was if I could speak into a watch and ask a question, make a request, and that request would happen. We did that by having a panel of people that would actually respond to those requests. Like, what would that interaction pattern be? Is there a business there? And it was really fascinating. You actually found out, like, you had people that absolutely loved that project. It probably is a scalable business, but it was not the right business for where we were at that particular point in time as a company. So you have to face the facts and you say, this is not worth the investment around here, so let's kill it off now. Also another project, Pebble Core, it was I guess a venture out into a new hardware project. The idea, if you had a connected iPod shuffle, so something for a runner to go out, they can track their runs, they can listen to their streaming music on Spotify, and if they need to make a call, they can press a button on it in this audio-only interface. And that we actually took to a full-on Kickstarter campaign around there, and raised a substantial amount of money on that for that actual project. But then again, in the face of a business that is not, I guess, getting to the point that you're now facing true survival sides of things here, you have to cull off those sorts of projects for, I guess, the ultimate health of the business, or, in this particular case, the responsibility that you owe to your employees at a large organization. So I'll leave it there for now.
Question for Benjamin? I've got one for you. Well, because you didn't really, I guess, cover this, but I know Nikki did. How did you communicate those decisions to shut it down with your investors and your employees? How difficult was that, or was it easier? Did they see it coming, et cetera?
I can't actually remember back to Earbits. That was I think everyone saw that, we'd already gone into a music industry when every investor had proclaimed they would never invest in a music company again. And the reason that was is because most music companies grew on taking music for free and not paying for it, and they'd grow, and once venture money came in, then the labels would come in and sue them and collect all the money for the back thing. It's a really great model for the labels. Not so good for the investors, but in technically, how did you communicate it? Well, with Pebble is an interesting thing because the press and the community was absolutely hungry for every little tidbit. And so, we had more of an issue in trying to keep news under wraps rather than not. And as things would, leak out and so forth, like it would cause, rippling news stories that would go, across the tech community and around the major publications. And, there is a lot of misinformation that had come out on various sides of things from there, which, we were actually, you never had an issue with communicating your investors. Like at the venture Series A level, you have a very tight loop with your key investors on there. But the wider community and so forth, like every word, every little signal that would come out would generate its own news cycle. And while one would say, hey, that's probably not great that a story is running on its own, like you actually loved it from a business perspective, because any news story was traffic, was awareness, which actually did still generate sales, even if it was good or not. And, the adage that, all news is good news actually holds true kind of regardless, my personal opinion.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? I loved the Pebble Core. I ordered 10 because it fitted exactly with what I want to do, which was have that wearable recording all day and give it a tap and do all these really fancy things. I'm curious, how did you, if you're really running these special projects and for any sort of business, how did you sort of do that validation when, it's hard to build a piece of hardware? Kickstarter is very stringent in making sure that things are somewhat real. Like, how did that work for you?
So I'm happy there's someone else that's disappointed they didn't get their Pebble Core. So it's interesting. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to validate stuff. And there's a variety of things. You can do surveys. Surveys are never really good because, people will all give you a more glowy opinion than actually you get. So you tend to try to look at, what shall we say, factual information, like, well, if you're going to use this for running. And so we had two markets. We had someone who wants to use a platform to develop on, and those were for runners. You ask questions like, when they express really positive things, you'd always ask, well, how often do you go running? And when they said, well, I'd run once a month, it kind of invalidates all enthusiasm they had for it. Then I think really the only kind of surefire way to get to that, and I'm going to jump over a lot of the middle side of things because for the sake of time here, is really like getting people to actually plunk down money around there. And in that sense, like that is why we went the crowdfunding route to do this around here, is all of the pre-work that you're going into building a crowdfunding campaign, validation. Now, granted, we're in the position that we can build prototypes more easily than someone just starting out, but it is, you put together your thesis statement of what this product is about, and then you go out and you get feedback from people immediately about whether it is you want. And I actually did this last August on a product, we call it the Pod Case. It was a cell phone case that both charged your phone and charged your Apple AirPods and held them together in one place. And we had a failed Kickstarter campaign. But what was really fascinating is we were able to, in the span of a month, take an idea for a product, work to prototype that product, build marketing assets in 2 weeks, and put out a crowdfunding campaign where we immediately get response back about what people really truly liked about that, and then learned why this was not right at this place in time. It was not that we built a product that didn't solve a need for any individual. We built a product going into a market where basically no one has AirPods to use at this point in time. So looking around on the Caltrain in San Francisco where everyone's wearing it, you realize is not actually representative of the wider market. Mm-hmm. And so I guess if I'm going to say, how do you do that? You try to do things that are really capital efficient to get to hard feedback as quickly as possible.
Can I say, like, on that note, I've found, because sometimes, I mean, you can get quite scared of failing or killing a product and you see it as a failure. And I find if you think about it and, like Benjamin said, detach from the outcome, if you can just take an attitude or really try and foster an attitude of curiosity, like put yourself in the shoes of, I'm a scientist and I'm curious, like, you know, if I do this, like, is it going to have an effect? And I find just like making that slight mental shift will take you from this like almost fearful thing of like, oh, you know, is it going to work or not? And in attaching yourself to the outcome of that versus kind of like, I don't know, like, oh, I know that there's a solution out there somewhere and it's like a treasure hunt, and like when we go over here and then, you know, and get another clue and you go this way. And so, I mean, as Benjamin was talking, I was thinking also about another time I killed something was with code makers this time. I started off running workshops for teenage girls, like teaching them how to code, and it was like just it was an experiment. Like I had no intention of building a business model around running physical in-person workshops, but and there are a few things about the model that were kind of a little frustrating to me, but what was interesting is sometimes you notice other things pulling you in a direction. So I just organically was getting, people had heard that I was teaching teaching coding stuff, and I had parents start to come out of the woodworks, like phoning me up or emailing me like, oh, I have like an 8-year-old, 9-year-old, like, can you teach them to code? And I'd say, well, I only teach like teenagers and girls is our focus area. And it got to the point where that was happening more and like was way easier. Like it felt easier for me. I'm like, well, I'm getting all these people like younger, like demand for younger kids. And then they say, okay, well, if you don't do it, like, what can you recommend? And I'm like, like, well, there's not really much out there. And so feeling that pull from somewhere else, or kind of naturally kind of finding that organic road into something else. So, but when that happened, I was kind of like, I had that realization, and instead of just, I really was like, okay, I'm going to validate like all these different things, and went through like interviewing, just hustling and to get it, like anyone I could find who had a kid that was that age, and go and interview them, talk to them for 20 minutes on the phone, and do that. And I had all these risks kind of laid out around this business model I wanted to do, and went and validated them, got our first customers like very, very quickly, and started building the product out from there. And it was all this, tried to take on an attitude of like curiosity rather than this is the be all and end all, and like it has to work. And as soon as I was kind of fairly confident that, you know, within a couple of weeks that's a way better track than doing the teenage thing, just like I still get parents of like teenagers, oh, when are you running your next thing? And I just say, no, it's done. Like, sorry. And just like being very, very, very focused and not trying to like, I find, especially when you've got limited resources, like diluting across multiple projects and stuff. Anyway.
Excellent. I share my take.
Yeah, so Chris is the contrarian, so I'm going to save you till the end. But Leo, why don't you... No, he's the contrarian. He's the one who killed something and you should have kept it alive later. So let's hear from Leo.
Okay, so my story is not that hard as yours. A couple of years ago, one of my Chilean investors pushed us to build a new product. We connect teachers with their students so they can communicate, collaborate, and share in online classrooms. These online classrooms give tools to teachers to help them save time, and to students to help them get better outcomes. So at that time, we didn't have a strong business model, and our investors told us that we should build a kind of marketplace to sell educational content because we were running out of money. We took the advice. I mean, they were really pushy because it was their money. We took that into account. We started building that product. It took us like 6 months. We saw that we were losing money building that product. And at the end, the final decision, 6 months after building the product, or 6 months after launching the product, we realized that we weren't making any money with that. We lost money in building that product. And one day I just confronted one of my investors and I told him, you know, I know that you want to make money out of this because it's your task as an investor, but it was my mistake letting you take over the direction of my company. So from one day to the next one, I just told the team that we should keep the product. We kept a couple of little features of that marketplace, which evolved into our file sharing service inside Udemy. And our investors at first weren't really happy about that decision because we lost a lot of money. But in the end, turned out that it was a better decision. Actually, shutting down that service and making a decision that hadn't our investors involved in an everyday basis operations, it was the best decision for us. That's my little cut on that. And the other product we killed, it was also a file sharing system, and we were charging teachers to have more space in Udemy to save files. And one of my former co-founders was really keen to build that. We were having fightings every day because of that, because I felt that we were losing money. And in the end, I asked my co-founder to leave the company because he had a different vision of mine. So it was a really painful process because it wasn't part of the main mission of our company, which is to connect teachers and students. It's not just to sell content or sell technology. And that was it. It was for the better. My former co-founder is working in a big retail company. Our company now is helping 500,000 users, so it was a good decision.
We should add for a topic for later is co-founder issues, and because that's one of the #1 reasons startups fail. And I've had co-founders leave that we had to ask to leave and stuff too. So, what motivated the investor to push that? What did they have domain expertise, or was it just a hunch? Was it ego? Any thoughts there in hindsight?
They just wanted to make money faster, you know. Latin America is a hard market. It's a shitty market, as you said, because it's a real pain in the ass. Yeah, because it's a real pain in the ass to get customers to pay because there's not a lot of people that can pay using credit cards or they can pay online. So, sorry, again, what was the question?
What do you think motivated them to do that? You said just a quicker
okay,
return.
Yeah, okay, so
why were they pushing that?
Okay, so
they
thought opening that marketplace would be booming in shorter time because there wasn't anything like that in the region. So that was the main mission. It was just a hunch.
A hunch.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. All right. One question for Leo before we jump to Chris. I want to make sure we have time for Chris's whole story, and then we'll open up to Q&A in general. But anything specific to Leo? All right, Chris. This is my favorite thing about having a big group of 50 entrepreneurs. I'm like, hey, people want to hear about this. who wants to talk about this? A bunch of people raise their hand, and Chris is like, well, I could tell you a story about a time I did that, and now I regret it. So I'm going to let him share his story.
It's not that exciting for me now. This is very weird to hold.
Yeah, no, it is.
So it was around 2003, and I was still a student. And I had a bunch of people ask me if I knew how to make websites, and I was like, couldn't be that hard. And so I rented a server, an actual metal server, went and put it in an actual server room, and then I was like, okay, so I made a couple of websites and made a couple more and made a couple more, and next thing you know, we'd done about 200 websites, and when we looked at it, we went, you know what, more than half of these are like e-commerce sites, because after the crash, or the .com crash, like the e-commerce started to pick up again. And so we kept doing that, and we just kept spinning out the same e-commerce site over and over and over. And there were things that we saw, like, you know, we're building the site, we weren't using WooCommerce. We were literally copying and pasting all of this code into a new version of the site every time. And basically said, like, what if we made that an actual product? Like, here's an e-commerce product. And we did that. And so then we copied the whole site every time. And then we just changed the design. And a friend said to me one day, he goes, what if it was just one site that just changed based on what URL someone puts in? And I was like, that's brilliant. So then we made a product and we called it Kaching, like the cash register sound. And that was actually, it picked up, it just took off. We had, you know, I think it took like 3 years to get to those 200 customers for hosting. I think we did like maybe 200 e-commerce sites in 6 months. And we were going out by hand and like signing these people up. And then it was like, what if people would just sign up themselves? Because we were adding all these entries into databases, and we said, like, let's do that, let's people sign up. And then it just took off again, and you know, we were way undercharging, and we got to a point we were doing maybe 7K a month, and I saw this really cool product online. It was called Shopify, and they were just getting started, and I was like, oh, that's it, we're done. You know, they're in Canada, there's this, you know, we can't compete with that sort of thing. Like, this was still part-time for us, there was 2 of us, it was all bootstrapped. We were working way too long, and I think at that point in time we were like, you know what, this isn't going to work. And so we sort of stopped working on it and just let it keep going. And it made a bit of money, and it covered some costs. And at the same time, Shopify is then blowing up, and then Mitchell Harper, an Australian guy out of Sydney, he started WooCommerce. And we were looking at it, we're like, you know, this could be a thing. And we're like, nah, look, this is Sydney, you know, this is Canada, like, that's just not going to work. And so we let it just basically fizzle away, and we started seeing customers moving over to Shopify because their product was way better than ours. They had I think they were at 40 staff at the time. And we just sort of let it dwindle down till there was maybe 10 customers left. And then we looked at those 10 customers, and what we sort of worked out was they're all selling B2B. And so there was an opportunity there. We said, let's try this again. And we put in a little bit of effort. But what we found then was, like, finding those customers was a lot harder. Like, the idea of businesses selling to other businesses online, and, you know, around the sort of 2007 mark, with the type of people we're attracting, it just wasn't working. And so we said, okay, let's just let it go. And so we turned it all off. And then, I don't know if anyone follows Shopify, but they just, like, did an IPO, and they're basically for over $1 billion. And I was like, you know, we could have actually done pretty well out of this if we had, you know, actually believed in what we did, and really focused, as I guess everyone's said, like, you know, focused on, like, you know, what is the basic thing. Shopify was always a much, much, much simpler product than what we had. We had, like, all these crazy layers where we let designers sign up, and then they would sign up their own customers, and they could charge $1,500 a month and add additional services on top. But in reality, like, people just wanted to come in and do it themselves, and we just got so many things wrong because we wanted to be everything to everyone. And I think if we had gone back and just gone, like, let's just let, you know, someone who's making a few things come in and sign up. Actually, Etsy cut a lot of grass as well, and so did Big Cartel. Lots of bands. We had, like, hundreds of bands selling merch and things like that. And yeah, we should have taken it more seriously. Like, it was, you know, it was on a side project, but we really should have gone, like, hey, this is a thing, and just treated, instead of thinking we failed because some company in Canada is doing it now, we should have gone, like, hey, that's validation. Like, you know, competition is healthy. And so that was the story there. And you look at it now, and there was everything we did wrong. everything we did wrong, and you sort of, there's so many times when you wish, like, oh, if I could go back. But the best thing out of it is I met my last co-founder, out of that experience. Got to do a great accelerator, got to build a great network both locally and in the US of investors and just other smart entrepreneurs. So would I go back and do it again? Yes, and I think that's the idea of like celebrating failure. I think it's really important to think of it like you are a product scientist, as Nikki's sort of saying, or a business scientist, and just say oh, that thing caught fire. Oh well, make sure we learn not to set it on fire next time and keep going. And believe in yourself. I think that was the biggest thing. Like, and I see that here in Brisbane, and in Australia. Like, people are building great things. Like, coming from San Francisco, seeing people, building great products and having great teams, and just like, the US isn't necessarily the land of milk and honey. Sorry, but we have just as many capable people here. We just have to believe in ourselves more and be more ambitious.
That's awesome. Questions for Chris?
Something hard.
You want to grab the mic real quick so I can get it on audio? Thanks.
I think you touched on one of the key things that I've been through in my short career was you try to make something perfect and you try to add features after features after feature. And in my experience, that can be a massive failure before the customer actually validates what they want. Like you said, Shopify is very simple. Your platform had multi-layered features and components that could actually help them. But Shopify made it so simple, and they probably invested less money and less time and less developers, and that worked. So what they did, in my understanding, is they waited for business-to-business customers who wanted that platform, and then after they built something like that. So that, in my personal experience, is something that I think if every startup founder looked at things and made something very simple and let it work, let it grow, and then let the customer tell them what they want. Because that's what I feel like most of us try to do, it make things perfect, make sure that it works, and I think we fail trying to make it too perfect. I don't think that was a question, was it?
Yeah, I mean, I can comment. Like, so my new mentality around that is, on day one, like, say, what is the simplest thing I could make that 10,000 people could buy tomorrow? And just like start from there, just like the simplest thing, and then just push it out.
Yeah, good point. Question for Chris from Scott, of course.
How do you find when you have like all these features, when you're trying to cover everything, when you really, like, if you were to scale it back totally, how do you find what features are worth keeping and what features you scrap?
Yeah, so now I mean, in analytics, like, I'm huge especially that was a massive lesson. Now it's always been like, all about numbers. I have a very simple dashboard that I always use that has like, your core value proposition metric, which generally then ties to dollars, whether it's the number of interactions on your product, and then make sure you're tracking that, and then the retention around that number, and then the growth around that number. And then you can actually like find the users that are being retained, the users that are coming in, and start profiling them and doing cohort analysis. And you can then start to see very easily like which things are there. Something I want to try shortly, which I take from GitHub, they turn stuff off and then see if anyone complains. And it's brilliant. Just all of a sudden that link's no longer there, and see if anyone says anything. But yeah, look at the, track it. Like heap analytics, if anyone is into that aspect of it, like they can track everything in hindsight. So you don't have to predefine what you're looking for. They can tell you every single thing that was clicked on, every single thing that was like hovered over, and then you can go back and say, who's used that? Who's done that? Show me that with a cohort analysis across the last 12 months. And you can see exactly where people drop off. And then you can dig into why.
Other questions for anybody on the panel too? We can open it up. It's not just Chris, but do you have other questions for anybody else?
Thanks for sharing, guys. Is that, yeah, it's good. Would you only now start companies doing customer discovery first? Chris, you were just saying, what can I build that 10,000 people would, that sounds like an experiment, but would you still do customer discovery first?
answer that. So, I mean, I'll tell you, this is the process I went through to create CodeMakers what it is today. So what it is today is basically kids the parents book them into 10-week courses, and parents pay like $34 a week for their child's class, and then the child logs in each week at their allocated time, and in their class of like 3 to 5 kids with a teacher, they write code, modifies their Minecraft game. So at the moment, like, we have like an online booking system, and parents can like put in their credit card and pay, and there's like all this stuff around it. But when we started and we had just an idea, we basically wrote like a list of risks. So one of them was like, well, do kids want to even learn how to mod Minecraft? Do they, like, what do parents think of an online class? Which was actually quite a scary thing for me. I'm like, I don't want to do this if I have to do physical in-person classes. Then there was technical risk. Or there was a risk in terms of like, can we physically run a class with 5 kids in it on Australian internet connections? So you've got like risks around that. And then like logistically, like, can you teach a 9-year-old who's sitting like on a computer where you're not in the same room, you can't discipline them in that way. Like, do they have the attention span to do that? So we then would run little experiments for each one. So we would use third-party software that had already allowed kids to mod Minecraft, and actually kind of find a parent who would get together a bunch of kids, and we'd go into their house and run a little like Minecraft workshop, and oh cool, they really love it. And then it's like, okay, well, why don't we do like a one-on-one lesson on that, using that software on Google Hangouts, and see like, can we keep their attention for an hour with just one kid? And once we started, like, that was pretty quick to validate. And also, I think I interviewed maybe like 20 parents or something. And, you'd learn stuff like when you talk about the problem and just like finding out about like their lifestyle and how they think about this space and what the kids do and what they think about coding, to find out if they're actually believe in the value of it. And then when you talk about your solution, I'd be like, oh, like these online classes, and I thought it would be a hard sell to educate parents and get them interested in that. And the parents were like, wait a minute, you mean I don't have to drive my kid anywhere? And they thought that was like the best thing. So I thought it would be something that I'd have to, would be this highly risky, like, I'm not sure how many parents would be into this online class thing. It turned out to be a major selling point. So we like interviewed them, ran all these experiments, and then we're like, okay, technical risk, can we actually write some code that like, modifies a Minecraft server? Built that, got our first customer with one girl whose mom then roped in like 5 girls, and she's like, okay, like we've got, your first class together, and our first class, like when do we start, how do we pay you? And we're like, oh cool, we don't really have a product. So we just each week run one class for 5 girls, and it was pretty painful, but we'd charge them for it. And then the next week we'd make a new lesson plan and be like, it was really painful because of XYZ, and build a new feature and run the class. And then, oh, that was really painful, and build more features. So every week there was like more, until it was spread to like by word of mouth to get our first like 20 customers or something. So we ran a few classes. And then that was the point where I went to, sorry, this is a long answer, hopefully it's kind of educational, where like we were like, okay, can we sell to strangers then? Because there's marketing risk around like, how do you communicate this new thing? Because there was no one doing anything really like it. And so set up like a Facebook campaign where people just put their name, email, phone number in, and as soon as they did that as a lead to buy a $50 class, I'd phone them up, sell them on the phone, take their credit card info, manually sign them up like in our software. So there was like no fanciness to any of it. It just literally kids could have an account, and then we'd give them a Google Hangouts link and we'd run a class, and it was like logistically kind of a bit complicated and messy, but the early adopters didn't care as long as their kids were smiling. And over time, like now it's at the point where like, we've got this Facebook campaign, and then a lead comes in, they get emailed, and then they sign up for a free course, and they book it all on the website and set up for the class and attend a free class, and then they like can book into a course, and it can all happen without me manually like pulling all the strings. So I guess I guess, yeah, like I kind of went from the high, like these are the lists of the risks, go and de-risk them, validate them, build it out as you go, and then when it got to risks around like marketing or stuff like that, then start to build in the systems around that. Yeah. Awesome.
I think the short answer is always, before building something, go find customers. Because if you start building something, you will waste time and money. So that's the premise for every business. That's the short answer.
Yeah, excellent. All right, so we only got like 2 minutes left. So I'll go down real quick here and just say, give me, what's the one thing that's really changed about your outlook after having gone through an experience like that? Because it's not just killing a feature. I mean, you've gone down a path to build something, something's happened. There's a lot of like, okay, what do I do with this information, whatever. And I'm sure you come out of it with an entirely different perspective or something that's kind of changed about how you approach what you do now. So share that with the group because, first-time entrepreneurs, whatever, these stories do help them, obviously.
Okay, so first, always be sure you have potential customers. After building whatever you're building, measure everything. Because in that way you will be sure that your product is working or not. So that's my take. Before killing it.
So I'll talk generally more on like shutting down the whole business or that failing. I think as soon as you stop believing in it, like you don't have that gut level conviction that it, I just think it's the lost cause trying to convince investors or employees or anything. Like as soon as that's gone, I think shut it down. Yeah, like that's probably my key takeaway.
So I'm actually not of the opinion that you only need to have customer validation because I find a lot of things that are built out of passion turn into great things, and there's a degree of play and funness for why we do what we do. But in terms of how that relates to my takeaway here, it is really hard to get at, like we all read something about lean startups or any kind of efficient process doing there. It's really hard to actually truly understand like how do you implement that in terms of a business. So without kind of going through it, what I think that's changed about my perspective is here that I really get that any given product or so forth, there is, once you've had your fun, there's something that's really core about whether it's going to be a business, whether other people are going to want this, something very intrinsic to the business, and you generally spend a lot of time working around that because no one really wants to know that the thing you're passionate about or you're into is going to actually fail. And the key piece is you need to go for what is that granular piece for your business, your project, your idea that's make or break it. And do something that's going to actually validate that piece of it. So that can be building a prototype, going out to customers. It can be adding a phone number for a service or so forth you're going to say, and actually getting people to call in there and try to sell them the service and so forth. And so if there's one thing that has come the way here, it's really identify what's key and then go directly towards doing that. Strip out everything that's unnecessary to answer that question.
Being last, it makes it really hard because everyone always has already said the things that you want to say. I guess I'll just jump into something that's a little more philosophical, which is why. So whether it's you're turning off a feature, you're turning off a product, you're firing a co-founder, like before you go into any business, sort of really think about like, why is this the thing you're going to work on? What connects, you from a passion perspective, whether it's or the technical aspect, or that you know this business domain better than anyone. You have all the contacts, and have a personal reason why this is a thing you're chasing. And so then when you get kicked out or whatever the things are, you haven't actually failed because you can still go again because there's some like core thing that is driving you to want to chase a certain market or type of problem. And if you it's not an easy thing to explain, but there's a great talk called Start With Why. There's a book, just watch the movie on TEDx. It goes for like 10 minutes. And he sort of talks about, a guy called Simon Sinek, he talks about like, people talk about like why they're doing things as opposed to, how they're doing it or what they're actually doing, and like have that for yourself. So then regardless of what happens, you still like personally are invested in what you're doing. So be able to answer that question, like, why are you doing this?
Awesome. So I just want to, thank the panelists for joining us here. Thank Little Tokyo, too, for some of the actual event coordination, as well as Fishburners here. Advanced Queensland and HotdesQ as well, too. We've got the hashtag HotdesQ, HOTDESQ, if you want to post any takeaways, or if you have suggestions for other panels like this, things that you want to see. We'd love to kind of crowdsource that information so that, again, we can tap into the 49 of us that are here now and put together some more, hopefully, good resources, and then the video as well, too, to have that archived. So thank you very much for coordinating that. They'll be around. Talk to them later. Thank you very much, everybody.